Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. Today, destroying the world's stupidest knife making questions. Okay, so today's Knife Makers Friday 5 is about the dumbest questions in knife making. Now, I want to make a point here. I'm not really making fun of people who talk about these particular questions per se. Everybody who's been involved with knives, whether as a knife enthusiast, a purchaser, a maker, anybody that is into knives is going to have asked probably all of these questions somewhere along the way. So they're not really dumb questions. What is dumb is if people get into pointless, silly debates about these questions. Okay, so before we get started, a couple of channel announcements. Forthcoming videos. Got a bunch of product reviews. I always like doing product reviews. Couple things from Ameribraid, the company that makes belt grinders for knife makers. They have got two products that they're going to be sending me. One is a combination slack belt and flat platen. I am really excited to try this out because, one of the little games that everybody who's made knives ends up playing is switching back and forth between flat platens and slack belt platens or slack belt fixtures. If you haven't, made knives before, flat platens are really useful for doing, for grinding bevels and stuff like that, but they're not that great for doing handles, and the slack belt's really perfect for that. So this will hopefully allow you to not have to be switching those fixtures in and out all the time, like I do right now. Also, they're going to have a big carousel for storing your belts. If you've been back in my shop there, if you've seen me grinding away back in my grinding room, I have 10 or 15 hooks on the wall with all these belts on them. Even with all that many hooks on the wall, they're always falling off, and it's just a big pain in the neck storing belts. So really eager to try that out. Also, I've got a forge coming from Vivor. So I've reviewed a couple of their forges in the past. They were kind of, if you're on a budget, you're on a budget, and so you're looking to pay the least amount of money for a product, and that's kind of where those forges fit in. So I'm hoping maybe for a little bit of an upgrade there, but we'll see. Haven't seen that yet. Also, I'll be having a video about using this vise. Those of you who've been watching my videos over the last few weeks have probably seen, or the last few months have probably seen that I am manufacturing this little knife making vise. I just keep finding super handy uses for it. I make it for Pops. I don't sell it on my own website, but you can buy them at Pops. Selling a bunch of them to Australia now, to Bjorn Jacobson down there, who runs Nordic Man, who makes a bunch of knife making products themselves. Pops is almost sold out of these things, so I'm in the process of making a new batch of those. So very excited about that. Last thing, I will be giving away another knife. I will actually give away this exact knife right here. This is a Shadow 2 cord wrapped in orange paracord. You can buy a bunch of these different paracord wrapped Shadow 2s and also Eclipses on tacticsarmory.com. So anyway, in order to win this, you have to go to tacticsarmory.com, my website for my production knives, sign up for the mailing list there, and I'll pick somebody in the next probably 2-3 weeks, probably 3 weeks, and they'll get a free knife. So that's cool. Okay, so let's turn to the dumb questions. Now, like I said, what's dumb is not the question. What's dumb is these fanboy debates where people get super emotional about questions that either, there are basically two categories of questions that people get super involved with. One is questions that have no answer. They're sort of nuancy, complicated questions, and there's no right answer to them. And so people get all emotional saying, oh, this is the right answer, that's the right answer. Nah. There's another category, which is questions that just actually have a simple factual answer, and people debate about them when in fact there is an answer, and there's no reason to debate them at all. All right, first dumb question. What is a handmade knife? So there's almost always a little subtext to these questions, especially if somebody's having a big emotional debate about them. And so usually the subtext of the little argument is, I'm the guy who knows the answer to this question. That makes me cooler than all y'all fools. So the subtext in this particular question of what a handmade knife is whatever you're making is not a handmade knife, and that makes you some kind of, rip-off artist. The truth is that all knives are manufactured items. And there's some kind of tool being used. Even if it's just a file, you're not physically taking your hands and molding a piece of steel into a knife. Some kind of tool has to come between your hands and a piece of steel, because none of us have files or belt grinders for hands. So to me, the question here is always framed in terms of, like, who's the most authentic maker? And some people like forged knives, and some people like stock removal knives, and some people say if you don't make it with a file or this or that, then it's not a true handmade knife. To me, these are all silly questions. As a knife maker, I feel like my job, and I've made knives in just about every way that you can think of. I've made Japanese swords, I've made things like this that are entirely made on a belt grinder. It's all done by hand, there's no pattern for this or anything. I do things on my CNC machine. And to me as a maker, the most important thing is that I tell you how I made whatever it is that I'm selling to you. So there's no hide the weenie involved in it. And as long as you know how it's made, then you can make a judgment about what kind of knife it is that you want hanging on your wall or hanging on your belt or sitting in your safe. Hey, let me jump in quickly and say, if you have been watching this channel for the many years that I've been putting information out there about knife making and knives, and you want to give back to the channel, help us put out more videos, there's a way of doing it, and that is called Patreon. So I always try to help out my Patreon subscribers. If you have questions about knife making, shoot them to me, always happy to answer them. And if you subscribe to Patreon, you get access to tons and tons of plans. So I've probably done close to 100 builds, and I'm not going to say that the plans for every single one of those are on Patreon, but a bunch of them are. So help us help you, patreon.com/Walter Sorrells, links in the cards and description. Okay, so here's an old favorite, and I actually have done a video about this a long, I feel like it's like 10 years ago that I probably did this video. But this is one that if you want to get silly teenage, knife making fanboys wound up about, it's the question of what is the correct name for Damascus or pattern welded steel. Historically, and I'm not going to go into too much of this, I'll put a link to my video about what the issues are, but basically, historically, there was crucible steel that was made in India, shipped all over the place, and all kinds of great swords and knives, and probably crummy ones too, were made out of this crucible steel. It produced a pattern on the steel that was sometimes known as Damascus. But at a certain point, people started calling it Damascus steel. Now, there's also pattern welded steel, which is where you stack up a whole bunch of pieces of steel, forge weld them together, and then manipulate them in some way to create a pattern. This is what people typically mean when they say Damascus steel today. So the word Damascus has been applied to pattern welded steels since at least the late 1700s. It was used in the gun making trade for 250 years. Anyway, it's a silly debate, but highly amusing. So I would recommend watching that video if this is something that's of interest to you. But truly, truly silly debate. So here's dumb knife making question number 3. The question is, hey man, did you ever think about making a titanium knife? Now, the people who ask this question are always asking it in the most sincere way. And so I'm not crapping on those people because, you know, it seems like an interesting question if you don't know much about metals. So titanium has the highest strength to weight ratio of any normal metal that you can get your hands on. It's great for aircraft frames and things like that where you need a lot of durability and not too much weight. It's about as hard as a piece of mild steel, you know, titanium is. And so it has no value for knife making whatsoever. But people think it's cool, and they've always heard all this stuff about how great titanium is, so they assume that making a knife out of titanium would be a fantastic idea. It's not really, but it's an amusing question. I understand why people ask it, but no serious knife maker is going to make a knife out of titanium, except as sort of a little publicity stunt. So kind of in that vein, what's the best martial art for learning about how to fight with knives? So the thing I always say about martial arts is the best martial art is the one that has a good instructor near you. The most important thing in learning any kind of martial arts is there somebody close to you that you can go to and get good instruction? The style and all that stuff is far less important. So I trained in martial arts for, depending on how you do the math, about 30 years. And I did train in some edged weapon styles, but really, who's going to get in a knife fight? In this day and age, it's a kind of ridiculous idea. If you're going to do that, you should do it because the training is fun for you and you feel like you're learning something that's useful for your life, because you're never going to get in a knife fight. What's the best brand of knife? The subtext of this question, and this is a favorite fanboy question, is, well, the best knife is the one that I have in my pocket, and the knife you carry is junk. The fact is, there are a lot of fantastic manufacturers of knives. There are a lot of fantastic knife makers. And as a general rule, it's not 100% true, but as a general rule, if you pay more for a knife, it's probably going to be a nicer knife in some way or other. And if you pay less for a knife, it's probably going to be not quite as good. But, you know, the extent to which that is true or not true is not really my main point. My main point is just that, look, there are a million different kinds of things that you might want to do with a knife. The reason that I carry this particular knife on my hip may not be the reason that you carry a knife yourself. And so the most important thing is the knife that you carry optimized for your life? And different manufacturers have different goals. Some want to make the best knife they can in the United States of America. If that's of value to you, then that might be the best maker for you. Some optimize for strength. I mean, there's some companies, I won't name any of them, that make big, overbuilt, heavy knives. I don't want to carry a knife that weighs 7.5 pounds, but you might, because that knife is going to be nearly indestructible, and that might be the most important point for you, rather than how sharp it is, or, you know, various other qualities. So what's the best brand? The best brand is always going to be the one that's best for you. So to me, these kind of debates, kind of silly. The most important thing to me is to accurately present what a particular knife maker's strengths are. Benchmade makes nice knives. Spyderco makes nice knives. You know, custom makers make nice knives. But the price points are really different, and the way they look is different, and something that seems cool to you might not be cool to another person. It's all down to your opinion. And opinions, as they say. So there's the question of, are switchblades legal? And the subtext of that is, man, you can't make a switchblade, them things is illegal. That's a more complicated question than you might think. So back in the 1950s, there was this big freak out about juvenile delinquency. Everybody was worried about Puerto Rican street gangs and all this stuff. And there were a bunch of high-profile cases, mostly out of New York, but some out of some other places, of street gangs going out and killing people with little cheap switchblade stilettos. You've all seen exactly what those kind of blades look like. So anyway, people were freaking out about switchblades, and I believe it was 1958, the federal law was passed to outlaw the transportation for sale of switchblades. So there are some states that have also outlawed switchblades, and there's some that have not. As far as I'm aware, switchblades are legal in the state of Georgia and quite a few other states, so I could make a switchblade and sell it to somebody inside the state of Georgia. I would not be violating federal law doing so. There are also some exceptions, so you can sell them to law enforcement or to military, active duty military. I believe that's in the law. Anyway, you can go find the law, you can read the text of the law, and you will know the answer to this question, so debating about it is sort of pointless. But if you do want to make or sell switchblades, you do need to know the answers both for your state and the federal law. Okay, the last dumb question, and this one is so tedious that it just makes my eyes bleed. But the question is, what is the best knife steel? And like, what's the best knife making brand or the best, knife making company or whatever, there's just no answer to this. There are literally dozens, probably hundreds of kinds of steel that can be made into an effective knife. Some of those are optimized for cheapness. Some of those are optimized for durability, in other words, for not breaking, shock resistance. Some of them are optimized for corrosion resistance. Some are optimized for edge retention. And then some are trying to hit some sort of sweet spot inside all of these different questions. So it always comes back to, what is the intended use for that particular steel? Just being hard, or just being tough, or just having good edge retention, or just being corrosion resistant. So what? I mean, you might make the hardest steel on planet Earth, and it's probably going to be brittle. It's probably going to not have such great corrosion resistance. There are probably a whole host of things that would make a super hard steel bad for many, many kinds of knives. So the most important thing is to look at the totality of the performance characteristics of the steel and to figure out what is the sweet spot for the intended use that you have, whether it's hunting or chopping or a camp knife or whatever. And usually there are several different steels that are pretty good for that particular little constellation of purposes. And the last point that I would make about steels is that if they're not heat treated correctly, it does not matter what kind of steel you start with. Every kind of steel responds differently to different kinds of heat treatment. So how hot you get it before you quench, how long you leave it heating, how quickly you quench it, whether you do a cryo treatment, how you temper it. I mean, that's just off the top of my head, things that are going to affect the performance qualities of steel. So unless you know how it's heat treated, it really doesn't even matter what kind of steel you use. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you can think of some dumb knife making questions too, so stick them in the comments here if you have some thoughts about some amusing knife making questions. So I just want to reiterate again, I'm not trying to make fun of anybody with these particular questions. I guess my general point here is that there's a lot to know in knife making. And my personal opinion is that the more that you know, the less you dig in your heels about these particular questions. Oh, you can only do it this way. Oh, this is the only kind of steel. If you know a lot, most likely you'll have sort of nuanced and complex answers to these kinds of questions. And as a result, you're not going to get into some big debate where you get all mad and, tell people what a bunch of idiots they are. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and keep on asking dumb questions about knife making. If you don't ask dumb questions, you're never going to learn anything. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.